Did you know that the government's subsidized cooking gas has been delivered to 10 crore households in India? Did you know that in the last decade, the Union government has banked 511 million people? This is more than the population of the United States. Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host Anil Padmanabhan. On Monday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced a scheme to provide 1 crore households with rooftop solar. I presume these are poor households. A few weeks ago, PM Modi visited the home of the 10th crore beneficiary of the government's subsidized cooking gas, what they call Ujjwala. Both of these events put the spotlight on this government's social welfare spending, coincidentally, just months before the general election. Frankly, social welfare spending is nothing new in India. It is par for the course. But what is novel here is that this government has ensured targeting of this spending. As a result, the intended benefits have reached the beneficiary. Consequently, these benefits are now accruing to the intended beneficiary. As I pointed out in the introduction, the scales are staggering. So over the last decade and more, 500 million Indians who were outside are now inside the formal economy. They have gone from being invisible to be a visible economic entity. This, my friends, trust me, is incredible empowerment. In turn, they are reordering India's political economy, especially this newly empowered, on how they vote. And within this cohort, I would like to flag women. To understand these implications, we spoke to Diva Jain. She is an astute observer of the Indian economy and a policy analyst. Dear viewer, before we proceed further, I have one request. This is based on the analytics we have received. Our viewership is growing, but our subscription is not. So 77% of you are yet to subscribe to our channel. Please do. It's very important for us to grow our channel. I began by asking Diva on this pivot in social welfare spending.
Well, I think from the viewpoint of the political economy, there are several models that explain government policy making. The model I think fits best in India's case is the transactions cost model. Now, what this model posits is that government is essentially an agent of various interest groups or principles. Now, for example, in India, these principles, they could be farmers, they could be urban taxpayers, they could be urban poor, they could be corporates, etc. So whenever government starts formulating policies, these competing principles, they start jostling for influence over policy so that they can shape it to benefit themselves. And well, we saw it during agitation over the farm laws, where a well-funded and highly motivated interest group torpedoed the laws because it would have destroyed their monopoly. So I think definitely there has been a trend, and government has been very aggressive in rolling out basic amenities to large swaths of population. But I feel there is an even more interesting underlying trend in policies that the government has formulated in last few years. In this context, I think where this government has stood out is in its ability to reverse this process a little bit. Meaning, instead of principle shaping policies, a lot of government's policies have created new, hitherto ignored principles who have rewarded the government politically. And one such new and loyal principle that the government has been able to create through Ujjwala scheme has been women. So yes, I agree, saturation coverage of the basics is a huge achievement. But I think even a bigger achievement has been the way this coverage has been targeted and rolled out to yield both political and economic dividends.
So, Diva, I want to just pick up from where you left off on the women cohort and the empowerment that it is uh, engaging in through the rollout of these programs. So, we have seen in the recent round of elections that the women voters have begun to now tilt the scales, unlike, say, a decade ago. So, how do you see this development on the one that a larger empowerment at play, and within that, the cohort of women?
And then, like I have said before, this has been the cornerstone of government strategy in last 10 years. Well, what they have done is they have identified women as a large electoral stakeholder that has not been given its due since independence. So they have started catering to them for electoral gains. Well, now this is normal, and politicians everywhere they cater to their electoral stakeholders. What is different in case of this government is that they have targeted hitherto ignored stakeholders, given them respect, and backed it up with immaculate delivery of public services. And well, the beauty of these policies has been that they have not only empowered this so far ignored segment, they have also been very productive from an economic standpoint and not just wasteful freebies in return of votes. So you see, this astute policy making by the government has allowed it to reap rich political dividends.
So, if we can drill down on one of the services which has been a standout feature, which is near saturation now, is the inclusion, financial inclusion. So, they have banked 51 crore people in the last 10 to 15 years. So, the BIS says that it would have normally taken 47 years for a country to achieve. So, your thoughts on this kind of staggering achievement?
Well, this is indeed a remarkable achievement. And, again, you see classic and very intelligent policy making by this government. So, this scheme is undoubtedly productive, improves lives dramatically for a large chunk of population, pays political dividend. But what is unique about this policy is that it does not cost the exchequer a lot, and hence it does not face opposition from special interest groups. Well, these Jandan accounts, mind you, they are not a source of profits for banks. In fact, most banks, they lose money on these Jandan accounts. So what the government has done is transferred the cost of financial inclusion largely onto the banks. So again, we see here government creating a new principle with economically productive policy that will yield political dividends, but with an added advantage that it does not cost the exchequer a lot.
So, Diva, if we pull all these together, what we are seeing is a very interesting phenomenon, the political economy, as you discussed, is that earlier 500 million people or 51 crore people were outside looking in. Now they are inside looking out. So this kind of inversion, how do you see it? I mean, what are the implications, both political and economic?
Well, Anil, from the viewpoint of the political economy, what this government has been successful in doing is converting access to basics from a privilege to a right. Well, while earlier governments, they used to dispense this access as a favor, this government has made it a right. So even if a new government comes to power, it will have to match this standard that has now been set. And from the angle of the political economy, this government has drastically shifted the set of expectations that voters now have. And the Overton window or the spectrum of politically feasible policies has now been moved in a positive direction. That, I think, is a big shift.
So, these stakeholders that new stakeholders, as it were, now is there We have seen they're paying political dividends, like you have also flagged. So, is this the reason
Mhm.
that this government has been very, blunt upfront about being pro-business? So it's able to carry the strategy of pro-poor, pro-business, and as opposed to the reforms of stealth in the past, this is like a reforms of conviction that this government is undertaking.
Well, that's a very pertinent question, and I think there are several layers to it. The first layer is the idea of populism versus welfare. And here, unfortunately, I must say we have this tendency to react in an irrational fashion. Extreme right will term all redistribution as populism, and extreme left will brand all redistribution as welfare. But that is not the right way of looking at it. And the difference between populism and welfare depends on targeting, feasibility, productivity, and execution of the redistribution scheme. So, well, let us look at targeting first. So, when a scheme is targeted precisely at the neediest part of the population, it becomes an instrument of welfare. So, Ujjwala scheme is a classic example of welfare because it is targeted at the neediest segment of the population. Well, on the other hand, we have something like free bus rides for women in Karnataka. It is a classic example of populism because it is not targeted at those who need it the most. I mean, any woman, irrespective of whether she needs a free bus ride or not, can avail it. Well, same is also true with free electricity in New Delhi. Now, coming to the second point of feasibility, to the credit of this government, all redistribution schemes, they have been designed in scale and scope in a fiscally sustainable manner. Well, this is classic welfarism. On the other hand, you have the election promises of the Karnataka government of free electricity, free rations, financial assistance for women and youth, etc. I mean, they need 60,000 crores for this annually. And you see, a lot of these schemes, they are not targeted very well. This is simply vote catching populism. The third point is economic productivity. Now, schemes that enhance economic productivity, they are welfare. Typical example is Ayushman Bharat. It provides health insurance coverage to vulnerable parts of the population and it improves economic productivity. On the other hand of the spectrum, you have the OPS of the Himachal government. It does nothing for economic productivity, has huge additional burden, and it is a classic example of vote catching populism again. Lastly, let us look at the execution of redistribution scheme and let us take example of Narega. Well, during previous government, it was extremely wasteful with tons of fake accounts drawing Narega wages. Again, populism. But this government has been able to link it with Aadhaar and plug these leakages, and now it is a welfare tool. So, yes, I agree with you that PM Modi is able to carry everyone along with him with minimal friction because he is pro welfare and not a populist.
The one big change this government has been able to achieve as compared to its predecessor is the targeting of social welfare spending. And it has been able to do this based on a digital infrastructure which in turn had Aadhaar as its foundations. Ironically, it inherited Aadhaar from the UPA.
So now, often, Anil, whenever we are looking at policy making, we solely focus on the design of the policy or the big idea behind the policy or the slogan that is used to sell the policy. And politicians, they do it all the time to satisfy multiple principles, to get votes, but they completely botch up execution. So a policy for all its grand aims and designs loses potency and impact. Well, classic example of this slogan is Garibi Hatao. Noble in intent, but zero in substance and execution. Again, you see what this government has done is not just focused on policy design and sloganeering, but also on execution. So, what has happened is policy benefits have reached the intended and policy has impact. More broadly, from the viewpoint of the political economy, public faith in government has increased. Now, coming to your point, Aadhaar based digital public infrastructure, which does 7.3 billion transactions a month, has allowed the government to have this execution ability and agility. Now, again, you see the intelligence that this government has displayed in policy making. Well, we know that Aadhaar was introduced by the previous government, and now it is completely identified with PM Modi. And that is because he did not discard it just because it was introduced by the previous government. He identified its potential and used it to its hilt to make this positive impact.
See this, Diva, I like the point you made about the trust quotient. Again, that is something new, and you're able to do it because you're delivering to people. So I just want to develop this further, specifically with the cohort of women. How do you see all of that has happened in the last decade? Women have been the center of that target, whether it's cooking gas, electricity, drinking water, everywhere it impacts women. So, do you see this whole gender imbalance in this country finally being revisited thanks to these external changes?
Well, of course, yes. And I think from the viewpoint of the political economy, let me make a broader point because what this government has been successful in doing is converting access to basics from a privilege to a right. So, while earlier governments they used to dispense this access as a favor, this government has made it a right. So, even now, for example, if a new government comes to power, it will have to match this standard that has now been set. So now from the angle of the political economy, government has drastically shifted the set of expectations that voters now have and the Overton window of the politically feasible policies that has been moved in a positive direction. That I think is a big shift.
It is then clear that the expectations of an average Indian have grown pretty dramatically in the last decade. The difference is that a lot of these expectations are now being realized, including by those at the so-called bottom of the pyramid. This is the new political economy of India. As I explained earlier, there are 500 million Indians inside the formal economy looking out. They are now visible economic entities. The way they engage with the rest of the economy will be fundamentally different from what it was in the past. And what Diva flagged, that access to basics like electricity, drinking water, communication is no longer a privilege. It is a fundamental right. That, trust me, is incredibly empowering. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNewsGlobal on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.